Keir Starmer's been working overtime on the world's diplomatic stage, charming Donald Trump, building a bromance with Emmanuel Macron. But in the end, global influence comes down to power and money. As the Russian dictator Joseph Stalin is reputed to have scoffed when told that he might offend the Pope, so how many infantry divisions does the Vatican have? Tomorrow, we may find out just how many divisions Britain plans to field in the next 10 years. The Defence Secretary says that the world is more dangerous than it has been since the Cold War. America's less reliable than ever. We're short of money, so where should we spend it? Keir Starmer says we need to be ready for war. But are we still ready to spend what it takes to stay in the Premier League of world powers? We'll be joined by the Defence Secretary, John Healey. And with Reform looking to park their tanks on, well, everybody's lawns, we'll be joined by the party's chair, Zia Youssef. Plus, the fair Dodgers nemesis, Robert Jenrick, is with us in his day job of the Conservative Party's Shadow Justice Secretary. And with no sign of a ceasefire or an end to the killing in Gaza, we'll speak to the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Hestkell. Plus, with us throughout the show, the former No. 10 Communications Director, Craig Oliver. The former EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Baroness Cathy Ashton. And the former Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office and Head of the Diplomatic Service, Sir Simon Fraser. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. There are few topics about which there are more cliches than war. In my generation, General Sherman's War is Hell and Edwin Starr's War, What is it good for, were pretty popular. Most of us had the good fortune never to have to fight in an armed conflict. We could afford to imagine a world without guns once the Cold War ended. But amongst those who actually put their lives at risk, whether soldiers, sailors or aircrew, a more common, more realistic sentiment lay in the Roman rubric. If you want peace, prepare for war. For many hundreds of thousands in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Sudan, the warning comes too late. Today, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross, there are over 120 armed conflicts involving 60 nations and over 100 non-state armed groups taking place around the world. Nations are finding ever more inventive ways of using force. New weapons like drone swarms, cyber attacks, disruption from outer space, and potentially lethal bioweapons. And with a gale of change blowing through the White House, long-held assumptions about the loyalty of our friends and allies are being questioned. Tomorrow, with the publication of the Strategic Defence Review, we'll find out how our government plans to confront this new world over the next decade. This morning, we'll try to assess the size of their task. Let's start with the government. A little earlier, I spoke to the Defence Secretary. John Healey, a year ago, your leader promised to smash the gangs that were shipping illegal immigrants across the Channel. It's reported that hundreds of people crossed yesterday, more than in recent times. What went wrong?
Pretty shocking, those scenes yesterday. Truth is, Britain's lost control of its borders over the last 5 years. And the last government last year left an asylum system in chaos and record levels of immigration. I think yesterday tells us a really big problem, which is you've got French police unable to intervene and intercept the boats when they're in shallow waters. That means we saw it. We saw the smugglers launching elsewhere and coming round like a taxi to pick them up. Now, one of the steps, and this is a complex problem, but one of the steps we've now got is the cooperation, new cooperation with the French and an agreement. They'll change the rules so the police can intervene in the water as well as on the shore, and that will help to make a difference to what we saw yesterday.
As you say, his Home Secretary said she's got this new plan, but it's not biting, is it? Because we saw yesterday French police standing by, and if you look at the numbers, the proportion of people intercepted by the French police has actually declined over the last couple of years. 2 years ago, it's 47%. Last year, it's 45%. This year, 38%. That's on your watch. We're not getting much return for 480 million quid, are we?
Well, you're right. It's not a new problem. I remember Chris Philp, who's now Shadow Home Secretary and was the Immigration Minister 5 years ago, writing that this was a problem, saying it would change. Nothing's changed except the problem's got worse. What has now changed, because of the work that Yvette Cooper has done, is we have that agreement from the French to cooperate, to change the rules so that the French can now, and this is what we want them to put into operation, so they can intervene in the water, not just on the shore.
But the point is they're not doing it. Are you a bit hacked off? I know this may not be a diplomatic thing for you to say. Are you a bit hacked off with the French, that they basically still aren't doing the job, despite the money, despite the agreement? They're still not doing it.
No, they're not doing it, but for the first time, 4 years, for the first time, we've got the level of cooperation needed. We've got the agreement that they will change the way they work, and our concentration now is to push them to get that into operation so they can intercept these smugglers and stop these people in the boats, not just on the shore. And that'll be part of, I hope, dealing with this absolutely intolerable problem and a level of small boat crossings.
All right, look, let's talk about your specific area of responsibility. We're going to have the Strategic Defence Review tomorrow, but can I just start with the American Secretary of Defence, who said on Friday that an invasion of Taiwan by China could be imminent. That's his word. Do you agree?
Well, Pete Hegseth and I talk a lot. He's really restating what we all understand, which is the Chinese Communist Party have said that they want to reunify Taiwan with mainland China. We've always argued that should be diplomatic. We've warned against, and the Americans are warning against, the sort of military action that the Chinese may be threatening. And so that's what Pete Hegseth was saying in strong terms, obviously.
But imminent is a new word. Do you think that that is real?
Well, President Xi has said to his military he wants them to be capable and ready in 2 years' time of taking Taiwan by force if needed. Now, that's the risk that we face. That's why the importance of diplomacy and some of the military deterrence that confuses and perhaps changes the calculation of the Chinese in that Indo-Pacific area is important. But what Pete Hegseth was saying is, don't take the military step. Take the diplomatic route, something that we would endorse. And for Hegseth and I, we work really closely in a number of ways.
OK, but the Americans have always said that. But I think the important thing is his use of the word imminent. It has always been the assumption that the Chinese are playing the long game, that they will just wait and wait. But to say now that an invasion could be imminent, these are his words, is a very different prospect. I mean, really what I'm trying to see is whether you agree that that is a reality, or is this just saber-rattling?
No, I think Pete Hegseth is right to strike this warning. He's right to look at the growing assertiveness of China in South China Seas and in the Indo-Pacific. And he's right, like we do, to warn China that the future of Taiwan must be settled peacefully, and that any military action will destabilise the whole region and affect us in the UK as well as those countries around the Pacific Rim.
Well, OK, well, let's talk about our place here, because part of what Hegseth was also saying, there was the White House now sees the Indo-Pacific as its principal military theatre, and he then said that that means that other NATO members, specifically us and other Europeans, are going to have to be the principal guarantors of our own defence. Are we ready to fill in for where the Americans decide they need their resources elsewhere?
Well, what President Trump and Pete Hegseth have been saying is what I've been arguing for 5 years, which is that the European nations in NATO need to step up on European security. We have been, and we are. We now, the UK, for the first time, convened, and I chaired the first group of 50 nations supporting Ukraine that the US did not chair. So we've stepped up on Ukraine. We're stepping up on preparing for a potential peace with the coalition of the willing, leading that work alongside the French. And we must do more in NATO, and that's what you'll see in the Strategic Defence Review tomorrow.
Well, I'm coming to that.
A very strong NATO first, because that's our principal responsibility, and that's where our principal security lies. I'm
coming to that, but I want to just make sure that we understand what the contours of the problem are. And just to make it very concrete, our carrier strike group has gone off to, has entered the Red Sea this weekend. Now, we previously deployed carrier strike group led by the Queen Elizabeth. That was supported by American vessels. This weekend, the Prince of Wales is being protected by Norwegians, Spanish and Canadian vessels, amongst others. Does that mean that we can't deploy our carriers without the protection of other nations, principally the United States?
No, it means our carrier strike group is a good example of how the UK leads the work of other nations.
Could we deploy it without that support?
It's designed to work with other nations. During these months, it's going to be in the Indo-Pacific.
So we couldn't act on our own?
And by the way, the Americans are part of the carrier strike group as well in the Red Sea and will be in the Pacific.
But my point is, my question is, could we do this without them, without the Norwegians, without the Canadians?
But we're part of NATO. We work in an alliance.
But you're not answering my question, are you?
No, the very simple answer is we're part of NATO, a 32-nation-strong alliance. It means we will never fight alone. So our role, as it should be, is to lead where we can, to step up the leadership on wider European security and in NATO. And that's what the SDR vision will set out tomorrow. And the carrier strike group is a good example of that, how we lead. We coordinate the efforts of others, including the Americans, and we work together. And it also underlines this indivisibility between the security we see in the Euro-Atlantic and security in Indo-Pacific. And that's why the work that we do alongside the Americans in particular is so important.
So that's clear. Point one, the SDR, we are not abandoning the doctrine of dependency, interdependence, let's put it this way, on the Americans.
I'm certain. Look, when Pete Hegseth came to the first meeting of that Ukraine contact group that the UK convened and I chaired, he said, look, quite rightly, we're challenging the European nations to step up. But that does not mean the US stepping away.
All right, well, let's talk about specifics. Are we seriously planning to put tactical nuclear weapons on fighter jets?
Well, the SDR tomorrow will set out the new threats we face. On the specifics of that story, I think you'll understand I'm not going to talk about the details of that. But I do want to make a...
But it is being considered. It's an option. Let's put it that way.
Well, those sort of discussions are not conducted in public and certainly not with a running commentary. I want to make a wider point, though, on our nuclear deterrent, which is this. For nearly 70 years, our UK nuclear deterrent has been the guarantor of our UK security. It's what Putin fears most. And the threats that we face in the future mean that we will always have to do what we need to defend the country. And strong deterrence is absolutely essential in order to keep Britain and the British people safe.
The Prime Minister is saying this morning that we're getting ready for war. Do you genuinely believe that we can do all of the things that you're promising? The expanding, at some point, the number of people under arms, drones, technology and all the rest of it. Do you genuinely believe that you can do all the things that you have that you're going to promise on a budget of 2.5% of GDP?
Well, first of all, it's not just 2.5%. We put an extra the Chancellor has put an extra $5 billion into defence this year. We'll hit 2.
The Prime Minister talked about 2.5% by 2027.
And we'll hit 2.5%, 3 years earlier than anyone expected in 2027, and with an ambition to hit 3% in the next Parliament. And that is enough to deliver the SDR's vision that sets out tomorrow. And that vision is a transformation of Britain's armed forces. It's a transformation of our industrial base so that we get a defence dividend from the defence investment that brings jobs right across Britain.
So you're OK with 2.5%. Just to make be clear about some things, you talked already, this is public, about 6 munition factories, 7,000 long-range missiles. When are those factories going to be in production?
Well, this is the point we've been running our strategic defence review, but we recognise the urgency of the action that we need to take. That's why the Chancellor's put an extra £5 billion into defence this year. We've signed hundreds of major contracts since we came into government. Yeah. And the announcement today with the £6 billion into munitions over the next 5 years will bring at least another 6 factories. It'll bring long-range weapons for the future.
You're answering a different question to the one I asked you. I asked you when are these factories going to be in production?
Well, the detail of where they are and when they come
into detail.
We'll follow. But
Mr. Putin's watching this. He wants to know, should he be frightened now? Should he be frightened in 2030? Should he be frightened in 2040? What are we talking about? Yeah,
look, the message to Putin is we take our defence seriously. We're stepping up our deterrence. We should expect to see new factories opening very soon. And we've already got strong munitions factories in every part of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And the investment we're making will boost the jobs in those areas as well.
Look, the reason I'm asking you this is you said, actually, separately, that you want to get to 3% of GDP on defence by 2034. In fact, you expect that. Is that right? You expect that will be...
Oh, yeah, look, I look at the way the world is changing. I look at the way that the Chancellor is fixing the economic foundations and that growth is returning to the British economy. Of course, I've got no doubt that we're going to hit that ambition of 3% in the next Parliament.
OK, but the Chief of Defence Staff, Rolly Walker, said this week, and I'm quoting here, he says, the biggest challenge we face of many is simply a lack of time. He said that a sense of urgency is needed to respond to the threats we face. 3% in 9 years' time doesn't sound much like a sense of urgency to most people, never mind the Kremlin and Beijing. Well, they're just going to keep ahead of us.
If all we did was happening in 9 years' time, that would be the case. But in the last few days alone, we've put an extra $1 billion into making our armed forces go digital with a new cyber command, an extra $1.5 billion.
It's $1 billion. No. It's $1 billion defence. The Poles are spending. I can't remember exactly what number. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Over 4% already. The Poles.
So it's how much you spend, but it's how you spend it. And you ask about a sense of urgency. I've talked to you about the $1 billion gone into cyber, the $1.5 billion we've committed for the next 5 years to improve forces housing. And today, you've mentioned it, the commitment of $6 billion over the next 5 years. That's an extra $1.5 billion into munitions with new factories. And the importance of that is this helps, and the SDR does this, learn the lessons from Ukraine. Because what the lessons from Ukraine tell us is that the country's armed forces are only as strong as the industry that stands behind them. So the investment is not just about filling warehouses with fresh missiles. It's about making sure that in Britain we have an industrial base that can innovate and that can scale up its production if we're faced with conflict in the future.
Everybody has heard your point, the point that you've made, that we live in more dangerous times than we have done since the Cold War. You've told me this morning the scale of the challenge that you think we face. The question I'm really asking about is whether the response that we're producing matches anything like that challenge. So here's a concrete thing. Mr. Zelensky said this week that the Russians are producing over 100,000 long-range drones each year. Now, you're talking about putting more money into production of drones. How many are we going to produce?
Well, let me give you an example. Over the last year, we've produced over 10,000 drones for Ukraine in Britain.
10,000? Over the next... Russians producing 100,000?
Over the next year, we'll produce tens of thousands of more. And the SDR is saying, pull the lessons from Ukraine and start doing some of that in the similar way for our own industry and our own forces in this country. And so it's about transforming the military capability of our forces in Britain by combining the power of innovation, AI, drones, autonomy with the hard metal of tanks, artillery and planes. It's about a jobs dividend and making sure that we can boost jobs right across Britain with this new defence investment, and it's about putting people right at the heart of it with better pay and better housing. That's how we strengthen the armed forces. That's how we keep the British people safer.
OK, we'll hear more tomorrow. Just a couple of quick questions, if you don't mind. Attorney General has been accused by opposition parties of smearing them as Nazis. Is he going to be sacked?
Oh, look, he's apologised. He accepts that his phrases and his speech was misjudged. Look, he's a really good Attorney General. He made a mistake.
OK.
He's apologised. We move on.
All right. Prime Minister called a press conference at a few hours' notice on Thursday, at which he spoke for 7 minutes, mostly about Nigel Farage's Reform Party. That just has 5 MPs. And by the way, because I'm nerdy like this, his speech had 1,100 words, 750 of them were about Nigel Farage. Why is he panicking?
He's not panicking.
Why does the Prime Minister go into a hangar to talk about a bloke who's got 5 MPs on a week when, you know, the Russians are threatening, trade wars, all the rest of it? Look, this is panic.
He's challenging a party leader, Nigel Farage. He's challenging a party that did very well in the local elections. He's challenging a party that is a leader who is soft on Putin, that wants to sell off the NHS, that is making massive promises that he can't fund and won't deliver. And why the Prime Minister is saying this is that we face across the board, irrespective of party, a crisis of people's confidence and conviction that government can make a difference and anything can change the things they see that are wrong in this country. That's the hard yards of what we're trying to do in government. But Keir Starmer's absolutely right to challenge Nigel Farage against these easy, soft solutions and the promises that are false and he can never deliver. That's why he was right to do that speech.
John Healey, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks very much.
Let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the former Number 10 Communications Director, Craig Oliver, the former EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Baroness Cathy Ashton, and the former Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office and Head of the Diplomatic Service, now Chair of Chatham House and founder of Flint Global, Sir Simon Fraser. Craig, at the heart of this, and I was really quite surprised at how specific Healey was about this, is a continued reliance on the relationship with the United States. Is that wise?
Look, I think he's got to say that, hasn't he? And he's got to say that NATO is still strong and there are 32 members that are signed up to Article 5, which is if one of us is attacked, we'll all defend. But it's definitely a question at the moment about whether or not people like Putin and Xi are seeing that and think that they maybe got some opportunities because it feels a bit shakier than it really is. But I don't think a government minister can go out there and say that they don't think that NATO is as strong as it once was, even though privately they're probably pretty worried about that.
But, Cathy, you know, we've got Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, basically amping up what the Americans have been saying for 15, 20 years. You lot are free-riding, but we still seem to be absolutely dependent and certain that they will come to our aid at a scale and timing of our choosing. I
don't think it's as simple as that. I mean, for starters, the Americans have been saying the same thing about our spending since JFK. If you read what he said, it was pretty specific, and his language was pretty choice about what Europe was doing. So there's always been, from every American president onwards, a sense that Europe is not doing enough and should be spending a lot more. No question, though, that in thinking about how Europe behaves, and I include Britain in Europe in this context, European members of NATO, together with allies like Canada, there is a recognition that the relationship with the United States is not the same as it was. How you interpret that, what that will mean in pure defence terms, is hard to work out right now. John Healey's doing his best to keep close to the Defence Secretary in the United States, rightly so. But it also means that Europe is beginning to think even more carefully about what does this mean we have to do with threats like Russia, with Ukraine, with the Baltic states and beyond.
Simon, one would never accuse our government of anything like complacency. But on the one hand, we're hearing the most dangerous times, everything is different, change times and so on. But actually, don't worry, the basic doctrine is the same as it ever was.
Well, I think what they're doing is reflecting the reality that things are changing fast, but you can't change your response immediately. And it is actually a fact that we are not capable of doing an awful lot of things without American strategic support and a whole range of capabilities. That is a fact, not only for the UK, but for the rest of NATO. So whilst we're trying to address that over time through increasing defence spending, we've also got to hang on to that relationship with the Americans. We're riding two horses at the same time. We're sort of playing for time in a way. If we think that the Americans are becoming less reliable, then of course we have to find ways of countering that. But we've also got to deal with the current reality. And that is that, there is an awful lot we can't do without them.
Well, can we ride the two horses at the same time on the basis of 2.5% of GDP? Again, I'm quoting him here. He says 2.5% will be enough.
No,
is that right?
It's a start. He said they're going to go to 3%, didn't he, by 2034?
Eventually, by 2034.
So, well, I mean, of course it's not enough in and of itself, but it takes time to spend money on defence procurement. They have to decide what their priorities are. We need to talk about relative priorities. Or then you have to set up programmes and spend the money. So it does take time. So it is inevitably something which you make a start on and you keep working on.
And I think we rightly start with the cash. Are we going to have enough cash to actually fund this? But I think that beneath this, what everybody's really worried about is the sheer enormity of the task that they've got. There is a serious problem in this country with recruiting anybody who wants to join the armed forces. That's a real problem. How are you going to sort that out? The munition stuff, how are you building the factories? Where are they going to go? How are you going to make sure they work? We have a nuclear deterrent at the moment that people think isn't much of a deterrent because it doesn't really work. All of these things are massive problems, also set against the fact that today the IFS is saying, well, you're going to spend all this money on defence. That means that other departments are going to face real-term cuts. And a lot of those departments already feel like they're on their knees. So this, I think, is a government with a huge bandwidth issue. Just dealing with this defence issue is enormous, but then you've got the backdrop of all the other public services, the lack of growth, that kind of thing. It's a real problem for this government.
It's about political trade-offs, that. And one of the big words you're going to hear is resilience, building resilience. That is not only the resilience of our infrastructure, it is making our people resilient. It's sort of conditioning people to understand that different choices may have to be made in the future. And we're a long way from achieving that at the moment. That's a huge political challenge for the government.
Cathy, the point he made, and that, I thought you made a decent fist of batting it away, but it is still the case that there is a scale issue, and that Craig's, in a way, just been talking about. This point about the number of drones. Of course, we're going to share the burden of matching Russia's or anybody else's 100,000 drones with others. But again, I was a little bit surprised. He said 10,000, and we might hope to get to 20,000 a year. It still feels too little for the challenge that the government itself is describing.
Sure, but it's not going to be on our own. There's a sort of sense in which we look at defence and say, what is Britain, this great country, going to do for its own defence, as if we will face any enemy alone. We will be working with our allies. They may be a coalition of the willing, they may be through NATO, it may be specific partners, especially European ones, for particular times. But we're always going to be working together. And when I had responsibility for defence across Europe, what you saw was the capacity to start thinking about using the economies of scale to get better deals, to be able to work out who could do what, who was best placed to do what. So you could pull together groups of nations, as we did when we were combating piracy off the coast of Somalia, to be able to do things together. So I think you always have to put this in the context of saying, this is our contribution to a broader question about defence.
Well, let me ask you two particularly, because you had to deal with it. What do you do about the free riders? The Poles are already complaining they're spending, 6-7%. The Germans are being dragged in. The Germans are saying they're going to spend money, but the French are always on their own. How do you herd all these cats?
Well, you do it partly by setting the example, right, which is what our government is going to do. I mean, we are spending more than many in NATO. Not all. As you say, the Poles are spending a lot more as a percentage of GDP. The Germans have said they're going to step up. Now they've got a lot to do, and there are many others. So I agree with you. We've got to do it together. But I think for the UK, particularly given the relationship we have with America and the importance we attach to that, we need to take action nationally to demonstrate intent, and then that gives us much more leverage in NATO in putting pressure on others.
And it goes back really to the point Simon made about resilience too, that people have to understand why it's so important that they do this. And if you look around the NATO table or the EU table, the priorities of different countries are different because of where they sit politically and geopolitically. And so you have to make sure that everybody understands the importance of doing this together. and that they're capable of spending the money, because percentages of GDP translates into actual money, which has to translate into what you build, what you buy, and what you do.
I want to come back and talk to you about what the Estonians think about all of that in a second. But all right, it's 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Defence Secretary's told this programme that the scenes of migrant crossings yesterday were shocking and that Britain has lost control of its borders in the last 5 years. John Healey said that there will be new munitions factories in the UK, but couldn't tell us when they would be in production. Lots to come this morning. Shortly, we'll hear from the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Youssef. Plus, the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, fresh from chasing fare dodges in tube stations, and here to talk about his plans to arm prison guards. And the Israeli Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sharon Haskell, will join us from Tel Aviv. Now, Reform are well ahead in the opinion polls, and they're now leading both Labour and the Conservatives. And this week, they've been setting the agenda on policy, promising big cuts to tax and increases in welfare spending. But that would cost a lot. Let's look at how much. Nigel Farage's party wants to scrap the two-child benefit cap. The Institute for Fiscal Studies said that would cost around £3.5 billion a year. They also want to spend £1.5 billion a year reinstating universal winter fuel payments. So far, pretty conventional. Many people in both Tory and Labour parties agree. But Mr Farage doesn't want to stop there. Reform UK says working people shouldn't start paying tax until they earn £20,000 a year. The IFS thinks that'll cost £50 to £80 billion a year. We don't know if the plan means national insurance contributions will be taken into account or not, by the way. And the Reform leader said he wants a more generous transferable tax allowance for married couples. The likely cost, £1.5 to £2 billion a year. In total, that's between £56.5 and £87 billion extra a year. Well, it certainly seemed to get the attention of the Prime Minister, who summoned journalists to a specially organised speech and media conference to attack Reform's plans. He called them fantasy and mad. I'm joined now by Reform Chair Zia Youssef. Good morning, Mr Youssef. You're not mad, are you?
One would hope not. Well, I certainly hope not. Look, Keir Starmer is panicking. The Prime Minister's panicking because he's well behind us now in the polls, having won a big majority last year. He's now 8 points behind in the gold standard YouGov poll. And, what's really interesting, he's talking about these, you just described the cost of eliminating income tax below £20,000 for British people would be about £60 billion if you take the midpoint of that IFS number. Let me give you some numbers. In June last year in Labour's manifesto, they claimed they were going to increase spending by £10 billion. 3 months later, Rachel Reeves' first Labour budget, they increased spending by £60 billion, and they found on that same magic money tree, they found another £30 billion for Chagos. So I'll tell you something, Trevor. People in this country are sick and tired. When it comes to British people, there's always no money left. When it comes to foreign citizens, there's a seemingly infinite amount of money available.
Let's not spend your valuable time talking about them. Let's talk about you. Can I just first get one thing, by the way? Are you planning, as reported today, to can final salary pensions at councils controlled by Reform?
We are currently in a process. We've got some very good people going through all of the numbers inside the council. All of our data on the councils has come from thousands of freedom of information requests that we put through. That's what formed the basis of our local government manifesto. We have already started finding things, for example, in Lincolnshire, where number one, pension money is being invested into these ESG investment programmes by mandate, and that's, frankly, a severely underperforming asset, so you're creating a wider deficit for pensions. And yes, we are looking very closely at areas that we can cut costs where it makes no impact on the constituents of the council.
That would include killing off final salary pension schemes for local council work, and presumably, if you got into national government, for civil servants too.
Well, that's an assumption. Look, we make no apologies.
No, I'm just asking whether it's what... Richard Tice says that's what you want to do. I'm just asking you whether that's right or not.
Trevor, the cost of the civil service has ballooned. It's almost doubled in the last 15 years.
No, you're telling me what the problem is.
I'm
asking you about whether, as Richard Tice has suggested, you would kill off final salary pensions at councils that you control, and that if you were to get into government, you would do the same for Whitehall civil servants?
Yeah, I think we'd have to look at that. Look, I'm not going to make policy on the national civil service in real time on your show because we're taking the business of governance quite seriously. We just took control of 10 councils. But I will make no apologies and be very clear that Nigel stood up. What was extraordinary was, when was the last time you heard a political leader in this country with a real shot at Downing Street calling for 300 to 400 billion pounds of cuts in their first term of government? I cannot remember it inside my lifetime. Here's what's really crazy about this. Almost all of those cuts, Trevor, would actually improve the lives of British people. That is the state of decay in this country.
Just to be absolutely clear, did you just say to me 300 to 400 billion pounds worth of cuts in public spending?
Correct.
That's what you're aiming
Inside the first term. Yeah, that's exactly what Nigel said in his speech last week.
All right, well, let's talk about what will go. Where would the money come from? Let's just get rid of the whole idea of, getting rid of diversity and inclusion people. That'll get you 10 million. Where is the 300 to 400? I promise you. I know who they are. I know their names. Where would you get the 300 to 400 billion quid from?
The cost of DEI is pernicious, and we've cited the report. It was an independent think tank that had come up with that number, and it's well-sourced. But let's go through some really big numbers. Shall we? So we have the $5 billion a year. We talk about infinite money for foreign citizens. $5 billion a year and growing that is currently being spent on people who come to the country illegally and make asylum claims. Then you have the cost of net zero, which we calculate to be the actual cost of the exchequer being around 45 billion, of which there is north of 12 billion, somewhere between 12 and 15 billion, that is directly inside government budgets. And that's before, Trevor, you talk about the fact that that policy, this insane policy, is the one that gives us the most expensive energy costs in the world. And that's why, that is the fundamental reason why we have no growth. Well, hold on, you asked me some cuts, and, I'm going through them. Then there's the 265 billion that is inside Quangos. We're saying we're going to cut 5% of that. That number's from 2021, adjusted for inflation today, that number's closer to 320 billion. Okay. That's another 15 billion. Okay. I could go on. So Trevor, the reality is we're the only ones. We're the only ones who are serious about this stuff. And we're going to put that money back in the pockets of people watching this programme.
Let's examine them. 45 billion on net zero. The Chancellor is putting 7 billion, as I recall, and I do recall it because you sat here and told me, into the Green Prosperity Plan. Where is the other 38 billion that you mentioned going?
It's throughout in a whole host of areas. So, for example, one area is the lost, for example, fuel and vehicle duty that is lost as a result of the frankly ridiculous intervention into private markets that the government has, for example, inside electric vehicles. That's a very significant amount.
So, hang on. So you're going to get rid of electric cars and make people pay? So where are you going to get the money from? We're
going to stop the state subsidies that are going into the, quote, electrification that is happening and the endless demands that are placed on automotive manufacturers, against their wishes, by the way. We talk about car manufacturing in this country. One of the reasons it has been decimated is because these companies that have made their businesses based on internal combustion engines are now being asked to make electric cars at a speed much faster than consumers want them.
OK, so we're killing off electric cars. 265 billion pounds on Quangos. What are we getting rid of here? We're getting rid of the Health and Safety Commission, maybe?
I think that, well, number one, there is definitely an overzealous health and safety culture in this country. I think
Environment
coming into your studio is
you don't mind having sewage in the water?
Look, the notion that people watching this programme know in their bones that the notion that that it would be impossible to save 5% on a budget of north of £300 billion from bodies that, by the way, are essentially totally unaccountable. That is in their nature. And this stuff, frankly, the Tories have actually talked about this. They did nothing about it. They proliferated it. Labour, as usual, have taken what the Tories have done and made it worse. I must say, though, that
if I can be... Let me put this politely. You can toss out a number like 265 billion, but you can't actually tell me where it's coming from. That's the amount that we spend on health service and defence. Oh, by the way, would you just get rid of the 50 billion we spend on defence? Maybe just buy a white flag? I mean, what are you doing?
You know what's funny, Trevor? During the general election campaign, Richard Tice and Nigel were pilloried for saying that it would be possible to find 5% savings. I remember it very vividly on these public budgets. But what's happened since then? Labour and Rachel Reeves have
I've asked you 3 times what Quangos you're getting rid of, and you can't tell me that.
Because that is going to be distributed and found across all of the... Look, you look at any large business, they are constantly able to make savings, partly through technology, partly through AI. I actually think the number could be much higher than 5%. I'll tell you this, Trevor, I'll come on your show. I will come on your show in the next few months. We've already got some very, very interesting things coming out of the local councils, which are multi-billion-pound annual budgets. We are going to demonstrate to people in this country that in these enormous budgets, there's a huge lack of accountability. Money's being spent like a drunken sailor because it isn't their money, and it's totally unfair on the British taxpayer. We make no apologies for saying that we have to cut waste, and the idea, Trevor, that you cannot cut 5% on a budget of £300 billion is for the birds.
The conversation we're having might seem mildly unreal to people who have heard about efficiency savings, but from every government. Why do you think they failed and you're going to succeed to get 300 billion off the public purse?
Not 300, well, so over the course of a full term. Yeah, well, some of these things are going to be foreign aid. We didn't talk about that. The idea, look,
foreign aid's gone. It's gone, by the way.
Should
they cut it?
Trevor, should this country aspire to give foreign aid? Yes. In a world where we have hundreds of thousands of children living in poverty in this country, that's unconscionable.
All right, let me just ask you a couple of quick questions which you can probably give a proper, an actual answer to. Dominic Cummings implied this week, the former Conservative advisor, that he'd been talking to Reform leadership, said that if Farage listened to him, Farage could be the next Prime Minister. Is he now advising your party?
I've never spoken to Dominic Cummings, so no.
OK. Would you like him to?
Look, I think Dominic Cummings, everyone watching these programmes knows who Dominic Cummings is. I think the things that he has said about the blob, about the civil service, about these inefficiencies that we're talking about, I think there's a lot of merit in those ideas, and he's been very vocal about that.
Zia Youssef, thank you very much indeed. Cool. No doubt we'll talk about this again many times.
Indeed.
Back to our panel. Craig Oliver, Cathy Ashton and Simon Fraser. Craig, you've been in government, 300 billion. I mean, look, we can, all have our views about this, but is there a case to be made here that we could actually grasp the nettle and reduce the cost to the taxpayer?
There is, but I think you've got to have a grown-up conversation about a pain barrier. And anybody who's had to take that level of money out of any service, I at the BBC had to cut a department, and it was very, very painful. The idea that you just magically walk in and you just take the money out and it's all fine, it's all straightforward, it's just for the birds. But what I think the Reform are doing at the moment very, very well is running everybody ragged. They are basically throwing things out left, right and centre, telling everybody that it's all very, very straightforward, all very good. It's very hard for somebody like you to pin them down because they basically don't have a record to defend. I would say Brexit is one of them, but actually the Reform Party broadly doesn't have a record to defend. And what you're seeing is that the other political parties are being run ragged, running after them, chasing after them. The Prime Minister this week cancelling a going to Germany conference in order to attack Nigel Farage. I want to see the government of this country being grown up and delivering policies and showing people, look, this is complicated, it's difficult, it's hard, and this is what governing is all about, not constantly campaigning and running around after reform.
Simon Fraser, you are the living example of massive waste in the flesh. Yeah. What did you make of that?
Well, first of all, the numbers were all over the place. I didn't really understand them. And by the way, there's a particular one on the Chagos Islands deal, since we're talking about defence. He talked about 30 billion. I don't know where that number comes from. I think it costs about, I think the deal is 100 million a year.
They say the deal is 3.4 billion.
Exactly.
But there's a whole complicated issue about whether it's net present value and not. But anyway.
Anyway, let's just mention, but actually the other thing is that I do have experience of this in government as well. When I took over the Foreign Office in 2010, it was George Osborne's austerity. I took over 20% out of the Foreign Office budget then. And it was hard. It's really hard. And it affects the services that you can provide to British people across the board. So, the idea that this is all useless waste obviously has to be challenged. When I left the civil service, by the way, in 2010, it was the smallest in numbers that it's been since the Second World War. And one of the main reasons why it's now bloated, if indeed it is, as Zia Youssef says, is because of Brexit. And the specious arguments that were made about how that would cut red tape and the need for... To
be fair, the civil service has grown quite dramatically, hasn't it? I mean, it used to be, as I recall it, something, when I was in public service, sort of 300 to 300-something thousand. It's now over 500,000.
Exactly. It has grown, and I think it does need to be looked at and compared back. There's no doubt about that. I think Brexit, then COVID, there has been growth in it, and so let's look at it. But let's not do it in a sort of random way. We also need to look at what the services are that need to be provided for the British people, how they should be prioritised and tailored. So it's not just a numbers game, it's about efficiency and delivery. And I agree on the efficiency point, the application of technology and AI to the provision of public services is very important. But it needs to be done in a sort of rational, structured way.
Cathy, it's... Nigel Farage would probably watch this and say, oh, there they go, the kind of cosy Davos crowd with their tame interviewers kind of sneering at us, but actually we know what we're doing. And that message is receiving, as Craig says, a hearing right across Europe. This is a tricky question to ask. Could we all be wrong to be sceptical about Reform's claims?
I think we should be sceptical about their claims, but I think we should be mindful of the experience of what's happening, not just here, but in a variety of countries across Europe and beyond. That people are fed up with lives not getting better, with feeling that whatever happens, they get put at the back of the queue, of feeling that nothing changes and that governments come and go and they say all these great things and we're all having a great time down here in London or in Brussels or wherever you like, but their lives just don't improve. And along comes somebody who says, I can do this, it's really easy. We just get rid of all this waste, all of these things, and magically your life will be different. Now, we know that that's not how it works, that yes, there are things you can do, but you've got to do them properly.
Well, we know
but we don't have a message.
How it has ever worked. But these guys say, actually, that's part of the problem.
No,
that's a conventional wisdom.
Yeah, what they've done is they've created a narrative, and what's missing from everywhere else is a story to tell about how things can get better.
And that narrative has been accepted as the common debate that we're having in politics. Yeah. You're seeing Prime Minister come and take on Reform and argue with them and go onto their territory and move onto their territory and do it. And we are not seeing enough proper, grown-up explanation of the pain and the trade-offs that are necessary. Somebody like Margaret Thatcher said, the medicine will be bitter. If it's not hurting, it's not working. They made the case, they went out there, they fought, they delivered, and they governed. At the moment, it feels like, look, I don't want to be unfair to this government. Of course it's doing big things. But often it feels like it's much more worried about what's going to happen at the next election 4 years away than what's actually happening.
But you're both making a case against essentially the conventional parties, and the polling actually demonstrates that there's something in that. The combined vote for Conservatives and Labour has declined to its lowest ever. And the question we've been discussing on this show week after week is this a blip or is this a real change?
But with respect, Trevor, I think it's slightly bigger than that. I think that politics has become often an argument about who's up, who's down, who's winning, who's losing, who's making, the biggest, strongest case today on social media and that kind of thing. And what we've seen is that the main political parties have successively withdrawn from making a very big case that at the moment there is going to be pain and trade-offs. We are the people who can deliver on that.
There's a lesson in defence on this, that John Healey and the defence team have made the public believe, rightly, that you can trust Labour on defence, more than the Conservatives. Where did that come from? It came from a lot of hard work, from drip work that has made the issue something that Labour's shown to be in control of, and a story to tell about why we're doing it and what we're doing. Okay. If they take that with other issues, that's the answer, in my view.
All right. Next, we are going to speak to the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick. We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
The Conservatives are now the only major party that wants to keep the two-child benefit cap. In the polls, they're now well behind both Labour, who are looking at removing it, and Reform, who say they'd scrap the policy. So, is the official opposition now outflanked to both left and right and at risk of sliding into irrelevance? Well, Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick was out challenging fare dodgers on the tube this week and made sure it was filmed and played big on social media. I spoke to him earlier. Robert Jenrick, we don't know exactly what the government's going to unveil tomorrow, but do you welcome the signs that they want to push spending up to 3% of GDP for defence, improve housing for service families and so on?
Well, good morning, Trevor. Look, we live in a very dangerous world, and so, of course, we welcome any extra investment in defence. We have threats on so many different levels, not just to our allies like Ukraine and the eastern borders of Europe, but to ourselves, where Russian aggression is seen all the time, whether it's their destroyers provocatively sailing up the English Channel, whether it's the work that they're doing to undermine our cables at sea, whether it's their aircraft flying close to our airspace. We need to ensure that the armed forces has the resources that they need to meet these challenges. And so reaffirming the commitment to 2.5% is a welcome step. We want to see the UK reach 3% within this Parliament. We think that 2034 is a long time to wait, given the gravity of the situation. And whilst, of course, I think that John Healey is a good man who I've known for a very long time, doing what needs to be done in the national interest, I am sceptical as to whether Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is going to make good on these promises. Everything that she said...
You wanted to go further and faster, as the phrase goes.
Well, since the general election, all I can see are broken promises from Rachel Reeves. She said she wasn't going to change winter fuel allowance, she has. She wasn't going to hike taxes, she has done. And from a defence perspective, because this is serious, she's delayed this review. It was supposed to happen in the spring. It's taken months more. And part of the review is that there's going to be a restocking of munitions that have been given to Ukraine and the building of factories. Why didn't that begin a year ago?
To be fair,
it's because of Rachel Reeves on the Treasury.
To be fair, your party has some responsibility. It's been 36 years since the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War ended. Tories were in government for 22 of those 36 years. Our capabilities fell dramatically, spending fell. How's a party that prides itself on being strong on defence allowed that to happen?
Well, look, I am the first person to acknowledge the mistakes of the last Conservative government. At the end of the day, I resigned from the Cabinet 2 years ago because I saw them. On defence, Yes, we should have spent more, and there was naivety across the political spectrum, not just in our own country, but across Europe, that's left us militarily weak. We've got to change that now. And to me, waiting 9 years to reach 3% seems a very long time in the circumstances.
All right, that's clear. Let's come on to your particular area, criminal justice. You criticised the Justice Secretary's plans to make space in prisons by early release. What would you have done instead?
Well, our prisons are in a crisis right now, and we do need to find extra spaces. The Justice Secretary said that she needs to find around 9,500 additional places in the coming years. And she presents it as having no choice but to release prisoners early, dangerous people onto our streets. If you saw last week...
But you didn't build prison places when you had the chance.
Well, we built...
What would you do now?
We actually built 13,000 extra prison places. The mistake was decommissioning the old Victorian jails too quickly. But you're right, we should have built more prisons. What we need to do now is get the 10,800 foreign national offenders who are in our prisons out of our country. If the Justice Secretary brought forward emergency legislation to disapply the human rights laws, for example, to do that, we would back her tomorrow. We should be tackling the 17,800 people who are in prison, on remand, awaiting their trial. But instead of getting the court sitting 7 days a week, she's actually turning down sitting days that the Lady Chief Justice, the most senior person in the judiciary, has offered her.
Well,
if she said she'd fix that, we'd back her tomorrow.
As you know...
But Trevor, if I could just finish this point, what she is reaching for is the easy lever.
No.
And that is going to make the public less safe.
As you know, there are many arguments about the machinery by which the Lady Chief Justice has raised. But on the foreign prisoners thing, how do you get rid of those 10,000 if, for example, the Jamaicans or the Nigerians or the Italians don't want them back?
Well, firstly, you're
just going to dump them on the airport steps or what?
Well, firstly, you can sign prisoner transfer agreements. We did. We did with countries like Albania, for example, when I was a Home Office minister.
Albania. You didn't get one with the Italians. You haven't got one with the Jamaicans.
You can sign more. Labour has signed none since they came into office.
You can, but you didn't.
But the
My point is...
Well, we did sign some. But the point that you're making is right. What I want to see is us use every lever of the British state to get this over the line. Why are we giving visas? Why are we giving foreign aid, frankly, to some countries that will not take back their own criminals? That is what I would do. I've been proposing this for a long time. That is our policy. And one of the big impediments to getting these people out of our country are our human rights laws. We are saying we'll disapply the Human Rights Act, we'll get these people out of our country.
I'm only interrupting you because I want to get on to the thing that you want to talk about, which is that you've proposed the arming of prison officers to, and I'm quoting here, crack down on Islamist terrorists in jail. How's that going to work? Would the policy apply only to prisons where there is a certain percentage of Islamist terrorists or all jails? How's that work?
Well, at the moment, there are some very, very dangerous people in our high-security prisons. You've seen just in the last few months a dangerous prisoner like Axel Rudakabana attack, allegedly, a prison officer, the Southport killer. You saw Hashim Abedi, an Islamist terrorist, allegedly attack a prison officer. These people are held in our maximum security jails. And at the moment, they're running riot. We are losing control of those prisons. And I want to ensure that we take back control of them. That's why, because the government doesn't seem to be doing anything, I commissioned a leading expert, Ian Aitchison, to do a review. So we give the government recommendations. Because my fear, Trevor, is that if we do nothing, a prison officer will get killed. And don't just take my word for it. That's what the Chief Inspector of Prisons themselves have said.
If I may say so, you're answering a different question to the one I asked you.
Well, let me answer your question directly.
You're going to crack down on Islamist terrorists in jail. How do you decide which jails to crack down on? Or within, I mean, how does
what we're talking about here is maximum security prisons.
Well, why did you say Islamist terrorists in jail? Why didn't you just say maximum security prisons?
Well, it does actually say that in the work that we've done.
I've read your press release.
It does say that. But let me answer
the headline.
Let me answer what we're proposing here. What we're saying is, in those maximum security prisons, where you're dealing with extreme risk individuals, let's ensure the officers have what they need. Give them tasers, give them stun grenades, give them baton runs, and give them access to lethal weapons.
And you're going to give them guns as well?
In extreme situations. Yes, not prison officers walking the wings of prisons, but enable them to have access to weapons in extreme situations. And the Chief Inspector of Prisons himself, Charlie Taylor, has said that he can see a situation where people like Islamist terrorists get access through drones to weapons, to explosives, hold prison officers hostage, even kill officers. This, Trevor, is going to happen unless the government take action.
We could carry on talking about this, but obviously I want to talk to you about the Action Man videos that you've issued this week as catching fare dodgers.
I've been called everything from a vigilante to Batman in the last few days.
Well, you know, people are talking about you. That's success in politics. But I just want to get clear about something. Was the point of the video this week a criticism of fare dodgers or of the police? You point out there are 8 police officers standing about down there doing nothing. Who was this actually aimed at?
Well, it's both the fare dodgers and the authorities that are supposed to be taking action against it, particularly in London's case, the do-nothing Mayor Sadiq Khan. Look, I was fed up. I could see that people were dodging their fares, and law-abiding, fare-paying people see that, and they feel silly. They feel foolish. Why are we paying when other people are getting away with it? And it speaks to a broader truth to me that you see graffiti, you've got mobile phone theft, you've got shoplifting, you've got these things happening all around us, and there is a growing sense that they're being decriminalised. So I want the authorities to step up and take action.
OK. As I was watching it, the words... I've acquired a very particular set of skills that make me a nightmare for people like you, occurred in my mind. You'll know the reference, I imagine. But is this a new Robert Jenrick pitching for something? Leader of the Conservative Party, Mayor of London?
No, I'm just trying to do my job as Shadow Justice Secretary. And I do think that, you know, you can wear a suit, you can be in Westminster, you can do great interviews with individuals like yourself, which I enjoy doing, speeches in Parliament, or you can also get off of Westminster, start taking up issues.
This is TikTok politics, though, isn't it?
Look, I think you've got to listen to the public, and sometimes you've got to shame the authorities into taking action. I've done this about litter in Birmingham. I've done it about tradesmen having their vans broken into and their tools nicked. I think this is an important way of raising issues.
Robert Jenrick, thank you very much for your time this morning. Well, up next, I'll speak to the Israeli Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sharon Haskell. we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News. Donald Trump says Israel and Hamas are very close to an agreement on a ceasefire in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu says he's accepted the US proposals for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Israel is continuing the bombing of the Strip, with more deaths reported this morning. I can speak now to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, Sharon Haskell. Good morning, Ms. Haskell.
Good morning, Trevor.
Can I just start by asking why it is still the case that Israel prohibits any independent media reporting from Gaza?
Oh, it's very simple. I mean, we cannot take the responsibility. This is a war zone, and it's already a very, very difficult scene in a very urban, dense combatants with many tunnels. There's an underground city. Can we afford some journalists to be kidnapped by Hamas, and then Israel will have the responsibility to release them? Can Israel afford them being killed, either by a tragedy or by Hamas? I mean, you need to understand that anything like that will always be blamed on Israel. This will always be Israel's responsibility. No, and as in other areas, and
if I may say so, many of my colleagues and I myself have reported for many years from war zones where things can happen to you. We take that risk because we are professionals. That's our job. Nobody blames Israel. Why will Israel not allow independent media reporting from Gaza?
Well, I have to say, you know, even with the war in Ukraine, you can go into Ukraine and report. This is a very, very large territory. But while an area or zone is being declared that it is at war, reporters are actually being pulled out by the authorities and they close this area. Now, Gaza, the entire Gaza Strip is in a war zone. And so we have taken some journalists under our security also to actually go and view certain situation. But unfortunately, you know, and I understand that in many other cases and in many other conflict area, journalists might be able to go into certain areas. But the fact is that Israel's constantly being singled out. Israel being blamed for many actions, not at her fault as well. And so you must know that if anything, but anything happened to these reporters, even when it's not Israel's fault,
if I may,
Israel will constantly be blamed.
If I may, I'm only really asking you this because it becomes very difficult, even for Israel's friends, to defend its actions if they don't know for themselves what is happening. And so, for example, this morning, we understand that 26 people were killed in an Israeli attack near an aid distribution center. What can you tell us about that?
So I've just checked because that was breaking just as I was coming online to your show. The IDF said it's actually reviewing this issue right now to see it. They didn't have any information to give me before I came online with you. But I have to say that during the last week, we have heard so much propaganda coming from Hamas about the humanitarian distribution point that I wouldn't be surprised if that's another case like that.
If I may say so, Ms. Haskell, I've just asked you about a very specific incident. It's a Red Cross hospital. We are getting reports. We can't verify it for ourselves. And I'm just trying, as I can, to get you to explain what you think has happened. From what you've already said, you seem to be accepting that there would be some Israeli Defense Force responsibility here.
No, absolutely not. I said that we've just heard about this case from your media, And that was literally 2 minutes before I came online to your show. I immediately asked to get some information, whether there's something like that. And they said they have no information and that they are searching for that information. I will not come and tell you lies. I will not come
But
and...
you've just said that, you know for a fact the IDF wasn't involved. I mean...
No, I said that
either we know or we don't know.
Well, if you want, not to report directly from the mouth of Hamas propaganda, there needs to be time for investigation
I would like our people to
whether there
report
was,
from the ground.
whether there was.
But you won't let that happen. I'm asking you if you can tell me what your account is, and you've just actually literally said two separate things. One is the IDF is trying to work out what's going on, and then you've also then said the IDF is not responsible in any way.
So what I said
how
is
are we
that
supposed to read this?
Exactly as I said it, clearly. I came on your show 2 minutes after this incident was reported by international channels. I'm not in Gaza. I don't know every single thing that actually happens there, but I let the time to investigate this issue. And then when I've been given the information, I can give you accurate information. I don't take the propaganda of Hamas as a given fact. And so I give the proper authorities in our IDF, who has been very accurate with almost all the information they've been telling all of the international media. So I suggest we wait. It won't probably take long, and I will receive information as much as the Israeli defense spokesperson will give you some of this information as well.
All right.
The fact is, I don't know whether there was an event like that or there wasn't an event like that, and I'm waiting on that report from the proper authorities.
Okay, thank you. There's one thing you probably can talk to us about from your own knowledge. How close are we to a ceasefire?
Well, unfortunately, this morning or last night, Hamas rejected yet again another proposal for a ceasefire. Even the PLO activists said that this proposal of Witkoff, the envoy Witkoff, was very balanced in between both sides, yet Hamas refused it again. There were many proposals in the last couple of months suggested by the envoy as well, and every time Hamas rejected it again. Israel accepted them. We can go into a ceasefire today. We could have gone into a ceasefire 2 weeks ago. But unfortunately, Hamas refused to accept any kind of deal over and over again.
Well, of course, that is not the way that they would see it. But let me ask you
these are the facts. I understand that the terrorist organization wouldn't see that, but the fact is, and Witkoff said it very clearly in his post this morning as well, that Hamas's response is unacceptable and is absolutely a disgrace. And he calls them to at least come to the framework of what was discussed.
Can I ask you something about the Israeli government's own calculations here, if I can put it this way? Your cabinet minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, is reported as having said this week that it's time to go in with full force without blinking to kill Hamas to the last one. What we see from the reporting, and indeed from Israeli television's own reporting, are the children, the bodies of dead children, some of them at least casualties of Israeli attacks. Whatever the truth or not truth of this matter, does the Israeli government accept that what is happening now is that Israel is steadily being deprived of its allies, of sympathy, even for those who support the existence of the state of Israel? Do you accept that there is a growing diplomatic problem for Israel out of this situation?
Oh, I know how Israel has been singled out time after time. The fact is, you cannot name me even a single war that children didn't die. A war is a tragic thing. It's a terrible thing. It's heartbreaking. It's cruel. We didn't want a war. Matter of fact, Israel did anything in its capability to try to avoid a war because we know what the results are of a war.
It may be inevitable, but forces involved in war do have some responsibility to try to limit those casualties. And the question I'm really asking is, to what extent does Israel see it as part of its role now to deal with this, irrespective of what the opposition does? Because as Israeli officials constantly point out to us, Israel is not the same as Hamas. And I think that must be right. Israel is a democratic society. Its values are different. And the question really is, to what extent does Israel accept that it has to behave differently to its opponents here?
Well, Trevor, the fact is that Israel is fulfilling all of international law. The fact is that our army is equipped with many, many legal advisors and lawyers who are supervising every single step. The fact is that the level, of where Israel actually reached in regards to try to avoid casualty is not met by any other army. No other army is capable of reaching that standard of what Israel actually reached during this war. The fact is that we evacuate area, we send warning. Right now, right now, the areas who are in a conflict, in war, were tried to be evacuated for a couple of weeks now. The problem is that Hamas is holding hostages, not just Israelis, but Palestinians as human shields.
Minister, thank you very much. We would like to be able to verify all that you've said for ourselves, and I hope that your government will consider, in short order, allowing organisations like Sky News to do exactly that. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
We will be very happy to facilitate organized trips of reporters. We do that quite often as well. Thank you.
Thank you. In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict. There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it.
This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board.
So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board.
This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse. We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first.
Help is slowly reaching these places.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust.
This is a picture of destruction.
Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right, i.e. fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometres away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Back to our panel, Craig Oliver, Cathy Ashton, Simon Fraser. Cathy, what did you make of what the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister had to say?
Well, your point about the need to independently verify what's going on is a really important one, actually, because what you get into very quickly is one side says this, the other side says that, and the independent verification gives you the opportunity to confront the issues. But look at the devastation of Gaza. We can see that what's happening is so many people are trapped, unable to move. I visited Gaza a lot in years gone by, and you already then had the sense of people being unable to make the kind of choices about their lives and the challenges that created, and the role of Hamas in all of that. And now what we see is this extraordinary devastation and the desperate loss of lives, especially the completely innocent children that we've seen.
Do you think, Simon, I mean, nobody could argue the case that the Israelis have a well-founded sense of paranoia. I mean, that's unarguable. Do you think that the responses to some of the arguments that are being made about what's happening in Gaza actually is not helping them in some way?
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. I mean, look, I'm not defending Hamas in any way, but Israel's behaviour and actions in Gaza have been brutal and indefensible, in my view, and I think increasingly that is an internationally held view amongst many governments. Obviously, they are, as you suggested, they are hemorrhaging diplomatic support, I think, around the world. But if you look broader, I think one of the problems here is that we're focusing on tactical issues, like will there be a ceasefire, will there be X number of hostages exchanged, which is really important, but it's tactical. And the real tragedy here is there's no serious effort at all now to address the underlying issue of the Palestinians' plight and peace between Israel and Palestine. There hasn't been a serious international effort on that, really, since John Kerry in 2014 when he was Secretary of State. And the Arab states in the region are not really pushing it. I don't think this Israeli government is interested in a peace deal, and I don't think the American administration are prepared to push it either. So the world is sort of shrugging its shoulders now, and that is the real underlying tragedy.
Cathy, the Israeli ambassador in London is reporting this morning in an interview, says no chance of a two-state solution. Is that dead now?
When you look at the situation, I can understand why people say, well, that's impossible. But when you think about it strategically, and picking up what Simon says, you've got to think on all of these conflicts and crises. The thing we never do properly is think longer term. Where is this going to end and what is the solution? You've got millions of people in Gaza and the West Bank who would claim that they have a history and a reason to be there. And you have Israel and the people of Israel who have a home and who want to live in peace and security. How do you resolve that? Well, you resolve it by trying to find a way that they can live peacefully together. And that feels like a pipe dream right now. But there is no other solution. Nobody has ever come up with an alternative to having two states. Everybody can recite what you need to do for it. The challenge is that nobody wants it now enough to really be prepared to put the effort in.
Craig, before we close up shop this morning, I'd like to return to the Tories and Robert Jenrick. What's he up to?
Look, nobody can deny that the Conservative Party isn't in a desperate state. And I think what Robert Jenrick is doing, to be fair to him, is he's going out there and he's making some noise, he's getting some attention, doing the video about the fare dodgers, that kind of thing. I also think he is really onto something in terms of people feeling genuinely worried that this country feels like a lot of things have become decriminalised and people are getting away with stuff. Where I part company with him and where I worry about him is I think he's trying to outflank reform, and he is saying extreme things like about arming people to deal with Islamist prisoners, that kind of thing. I don't think that's the right path. He's basically, I think, probably peaking too soon. He's showing everybody he absolutely wants to be leader of the Conservative Party. He's suggesting that he could do it. If he were to become leader of the Conservative Party in the next year, I suspect there might be another one before the next election. So that's what's really going on here, I think.
Cathy, is the Prime Minister right to see reform as this big threat now?
He's got 4 years before the next election. I think there's a sense, I feel, that they need to sort of calm down a bit, get on with fixing the problems, sorting out, giving us the vision, deciding what needs to be done, dealing with these problems. You know, people do worry about fare dodgers and litter, people's tools being stolen, all of these things, really showing solutions. Then I think he can worry about reform then.
Simon, just very quickly, we've got 20 seconds. Is something really changing in politics, or is this going to be business as usual when we get back to elections?
Obviously, things are changing in politics in this country and other European countries in the United States. And you raised the point that we need to take those changes seriously and we need to react to them.
Thank you very much, all of you. That is it for this week. I'll be back next Sunday, 08:30.